Simón Bolívar, in full Simón José Antonio de la Santísima Trinidad Bolívar y Palacios, was a Venezuelan military and political leader who played an instrumental role in the establishment of Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru and Colombia as sovereign states, independent of Spanish rule. Bolívar was born into a wealthy, aristocratic Creole family, and similar to others of his day, he was educated in Europe at a young age, arriving in Spain at the age of 16. There, he was introduced to the thoughts and ideas of learned Enlightenment philosophers, which filled him with the ambition to replace the Spanish as rulers. Taking advantage of the disorder in Spain prompted by the Peninsular War, Bolívar inaugurated his campaign for independence in 1808, appealing to the wealthy Creole population by seeking freedom through a conservative process, and had an organized national congress established within 3 years. Despite a number of hindrances, including the arrival of an unprecedented large Spanish expeditionary force, the revolutionaries eventually prevailed, culminating in a patriot victory at the Battle of Carabobo in 1821, which effectively made Venezuela a truly independent country. Following this triumph over the Spanish monarchy, Bolívar participated in the foundation of the first Union of Independent Nations in Latin America, Gran Colombia, of which he was president from 1819 to 1830. Through further military conquest, he also conquered Ecuador, Peru, and finally, Bolivia, assuming the presidency of each of these new nations. At the peak of his power, Bolívar ruled over a vast territory from the Argentine border to the Caribbean. Family history. The surname Bolívar derives from the Bolivar aristocrats who came from a small village in the Basque Country, Spain, called La Puebla de Bolívar. His father came from the female line of the Ardanza family. His maternal grandmother was descended from families from the Canary Islands that settled in the country. The Bolívars settled in Brazil in the 16th century. Bolívar's first South American ancestor was Simón de Bolívar, who went to live and work with the governor of Santo Domingo from 1559 to 1560. When the governor of Santo Domingo was reassigned to Venezuela by the Spanish crown in 1569, Simón de Bolívar came back with him. As an early settler in Caracas province, he became prominent in the local society, as a result of which he and his descendants were granted estates, encomiendas, and positions in the Caracas Cabildo. The social position of the family is illustrated by the fact that when Caracas Cathedral was built in 1569, the Bolívar family had one of the first dedicated side chapels. The majority of the wealth of Simón de Bolívar's descendants came from the estates. The most important of these estates was a sugar plantation with an encomienda that provided the labor needed to run the estate. Another portion of the Bolívar wealth came from the silver, gold, and more importantly, copper mines in Venezuela. In 1669, small gold deposits were first mined in Venezuela, leading to further discoveries of much more extensive copper deposits. From his mother's side, Bolívar inherited the copper mines at Coco Rote. Native American and African slaves provided the majority of the labor in these mines. Toward the end of the 17th century, copper exploitation became so prominent in Venezuela that the metal became known as cobre at Caracas. Many of the mines became the property of the Bolívar family. Bolívar's grandfather, Juan de Bolívar y Martínez de Villegas, paid 22,000 ducats to the monastery at Santa Maria de Montserrat in 1728 for a title of nobility that had been granted by the King, Philip V of Spain, for its maintenance. The crown never issued the patent of nobility, and so the purchase became the subject of lawsuits that were still in progress during Bolívar's lifetime. When independence from Spain made the point moot, Bolívar ultimately gave away his personal fortune to the revolution. Early life. Simón Bolívar was born in a house in Caracas, Captaincy General of Venezuela, on 24 July 1783. Bolivar was baptized as Simón José Antonio de la Santísima Trinidad Bolivar y Palacios. His mother was Doña María de la Concepción Palacios y Blanco and his father was Coronel Don Juan Vicente Bolivar y Ponte. He had two older sisters and a brother, María Antonia, Juana, and Juan Vicente. Another sister, María del Carmen, died at birth. Bolivar's parents found themselves in a circumstance that forced him to entrust the baby Simón Bolívar to the care of Doña Inés Manspada Millas, and the family's slave La Negra Hipólita. A couple of years later Bolívar returned to the love and care of his parents. But this traumatic experience would have a severe effect on Bolívar's life. Before his third birthday, his father Juan Vicente had died. Bolívar's father died in his sleep when Bolívar was 2.5 years old. Bolívar's mother, María Concepción de Palacios y Blanco, died when he was approaching 9 years of age. He was then placed in the custody of a severe instructor, Miguel José Sanz, but this relationship did not work out and he was sent back to his home. In an effort to give Bolívar the best education possible, he received private lessons from the renowned professors Andrés Bello, Guillermo Pellegrin, José Antonio Negrita, Fernando Vides, Father Andújar, and the most influential of all, Don Simón Rodríguez, formerly known as Simón Carreño. Don Simón Rodríguez was later to become Bolívar's friend and mentor, and he instilled in the young man the ideas of liberty, enlightenment, and freedom. In the meantime, he was mostly cared for by his nurse, a black slave woman named Hipólita, whom he later called the only mother I have known. His instructor, Don Simón, understood the young Bolívar's personality and inclinations, and tried from the very beginning to be an empathetic friend. They took long walks through the countryside and climbed mountains. Don Simón taught Bolívar how to swim and ride horses, and, in the process, taught him about liberty, human rights, politics, history, and sociology. Military career. When Bolívar was 14, his private instructor and mentor Simón Rodríguez had to abandon the country, as he was accused of being involved in a conspiracy against the Spanish government in Caracas. Thus, Bolívar entered the military academy of the militias de Veraguas, which his father had sought out as colonel years earlier. Through these years of military training, he developed his fervent passion for armaments, liberty, and military strategy, which he later would employ on the battlefields of the Wars of Independence. A few years later, while in Paris, Bolívar witnessed the coronation of Napoleon in Notre Dame, and this majestic event left a profound impression upon him. From that moment he wished that he could emulate similar triumphant glory for the people of his native land. El Libertador. Bolívar returned to Venezuela in 1807. After the coup on 19 April 1810, Venezuela achieved de facto independence when the Supreme Junta of Caracas was established and the colonial administrators deposed. The junta sent a delegation to Great Britain to get British recognition and aid. This delegation, which included Simón Bolívar and future Venezuelan notables Andrés Bello and Luis López Méndez, met with and persuaded Francisco de Miranda to return to his native land. In 1811 a delegation from the Supreme Junta, among them Bolívar, and a crowd of common people enthusiastically received Miranda in La Guaira. During civil war conducted by Miranda, Bolívar was promoted to colonel and made commandant of Puerto Cabello the following year in 1812. At the same time that royalist frigate Captain Domingo de Monteverde was making fast and vast advances into Republican territory from the west, Bolívar lost control of San Felipe Castle along with its ammunition stores on 30 June 1812. Deciding that the situation was lost, Bolívar effectively abandoned his post and retreated to his estate in San Mateo. Miranda also saw the Republican causes lost and signed in San Mateo town a capitulation with Monteverde on the 25th of July. Then Colonel Bolivar and other revolutionary officers claimed his actions as treasonous. In one of Bolivar's most morally dubious acts, Bolivar and others arrested and handed Miranda over to the Spanish Royal Army in La Guay report. For his apparent services to the Royalist cause, Monteverde granted Bolivar a passport, and Bolivar left for Curaçao on the 27th of August. In 1813 he was given a military command in Tunia, New Granada, under the direction of the Congress of United Provinces of New Granada, which had formed out of the juntas established in 1810. This was the beginning of the famous Admirable Campaign. He entered Mérida on the 24th of May, where he was proclaimed as El Libertador. That event was followed by the occupation of Trujillo on the 9th of June. 6 days later, on the 15th of June, he dictated his famous decree of war to the death, allowing the killing of any Spaniard not actively supporting independence. Caracas was retaken on the 6th of August 1813 and Bolivar was ratified as El Libertador, thus proclaiming the restoration of the Venezuelan Republic. Due to the rebellion of José Tomás Boves in 1814 and the fall of the Republic, he returned to New Granada, where he then commanded a force for the United Provinces and entered Bogotá in 1814, recapturing the city from the dissenting Republican forces of Cundinamarca. He intended to march into Cartagena and enlist the aid of local forces in order to capture Royalist Santa Marta. In 1815, after a number of political and military disputes with the government of Cartagena, however, Bolivar fled to Jamaica, where he was denied support and an attempt was made on his life, after which he fled to Haiti, where he was granted sanctuary and protection. He befriended Alexandre Pétion, the president of the newly independent country, and petitioned him for aid. Should I not let it be known to later generations that Alexandre Pétion is the true liberator of my country? Simón Bolívar in 1816. With Haitian soldiers and vital material support, Bolivar landed in Venezuela and fulfilled his promise to Alexandre Pétion to free Spanish America's slaves on the 2nd of June 1816. In January 1817, on a second expedition, Bolivar captured Angostura in July, after defeating the counter-attack of Miguel del Arthur. However, Venezuela remained a captaincy of Spain after the victory in 1818 by Pablo Murillo in the Second Battle of La Puerta. Yet, Bolivar was able to open the Second National Congress in Angostura on the 15th of February, 1819, in which Bolivar was elected president and Francisco Antonio Zea vice president. Bolivar then decided that he would first fight for the independence of New Granada, to gain resources of the viceroyalty, intending later to consolidate the independence of Venezuela. The campaign for the independence of New Granada was consolidated with the victory at the Battle of Boyacá on the 7th of August, 1819. Bolivar returned to Angostura, where Congress passed a law forming the Republic of Greater Colombia on the 17th of December, making Bolivar president and Zea vice president, with Santander vice president on the New Granada side, and Juan German Rocho vice president on the Venezuela side. Murillo was left in control of Caracas and the coastal highlands. After the restoration of the Cadiz Constitution, Murillo ratified two treaties with Bolivar on the 25th of November, 1820, calling for a 6-month armistice and recognizing Bolivar as President of the Republic. Bolivar and Murillo met in San Fernando de Rapor on the 27th of November, after which Murillo left Venezuela for Spain, leaving Latorre in command. From his newly consolidated base of power, Bolivar launched outright independence campaigns in Venezuela and Ecuador, and these campaigns were concluded with the victory at the Battle of Carabobo, after which he triumphantly entered Caracas on the 29th of June 1821. On the 7th of September 1821, the Gran Colombia was created, with Bolivar as president and Francisco de Paula Santander as vice president. Bolivar followed with the Battle of Bombona and the Battle of Pichincha, after which Bolivar entered Quito on 16 June 1822. On 26 and 27 July 1822, Bolivar held the Guayaquil Conference with the Argentinian General José de San Martin, who had received the title of Protector of Peruvian Freedom in August 1821 after having partially liberated Peru from the Spanish. Thereafter, Bolivar took over the task of fully liberating Peru. The Peruvian Congress named him Dictator of Peru on 10 February 1824, which allowed Bolivar to reorganize completely the political and military administration. Assisted by Antonio José de Sucre, Bolivar decisively defeated the Spanish cavalry at the Battle of Junín on 6 August 1824. Sucre destroyed the still numerically superior remnants of the Spanish forces at Ayacucho on 9 December 1824. On 6 August 1825, at the Congress of Upper Peru, the Republic of Bolivia was created, and voted Bolivar president. Bolivar is thus one of the few men to have a country named after him. Bolivar returned to Caracas on 12 January 1827, but returned to Bogotá on 10 September 1827 to assume absolute power, setting the date of the Constituent Congress, 2 January 1830, as the day he would surrender power. Proclamation of Presidency. Bolivar had great difficulties in maintaining control of the vast Gran Colombia. In 1826, internal divisions had sparked dissent throughout the nation, and regional uprisings erupted in Venezuela. The new South American Union had revealed its fragility and appeared to be on the verge of collapse. To preserve the Union, an amnesty was declared and an arrangement was reached with the Venezuelan rebels. But this increased the political dissent in neighboring New Granada. In an attempt to keep the nation together as a single entity, Bolivar called for a constitutional convention at Tucana in March 1828. Bolivar's dream was freedom for all races in the Americas, but felt the federation found in the U.S. was unworkable. For this reason, and to prevent a breakup, Bolivar sought to implement a more centralist model of government in Gran Colombia, including some or all of the elements of the Bolivian constitution he had written, which included a lifetime presidency with the ability to select a successor. This move was considered controversial in New Granada and was one of the reasons for the deliberations, which met from 9 April to 10 June 1828. The convention almost ended up drafting a document which would have implemented a radically federalist form of government, which would have greatly reduced the powers of a central administration. The Federalist faction was able to command a majority for the draft of a new constitution which has definite federal characteristics despite its ostensibly centralist outline. Unhappy with what would be the ensuing result, pro-Bolivar delegates withdrew from the convention, leaving it moribund. 2 months after the failure of this Congress to write a new constitution, Bolivar was declared President Liberator in Colombia's organic decree. He considered this as a temporary measure, as a means to re-establish his authority and save the republic, although it increased dissatisfaction and anger among his political opponents. An assassination attempt on 25 September 1828 failed, thanks to the help of his lover, Manuela Sáenz. Bolivar afterward described Manuela as liberatrix of the liberator. Although Bolivar emerged safely from the attempt, this nevertheless greatly affected him. Dissent continued, and uprisings occurred in New Granada, Venezuela, and Ecuador during the next 2 years. A failed dream. On January 20, 1830, Bolivar's last address to the nation, in which he announces that he will be stepping down from the presidency of Gran Colombia, reveals a distraught Bolivar trying at all costs to maintain the union and cautioning the people about the intentions of those who advocated for separation. Back then, Colombians referred to the people of Gran Colombia, not to be confused with modern-day Colombia. Bolivar ultimately failed in his attempt to prevent the collapse of the Union. Gran Colombia was dissolved later that year and was replaced by the republics of Venezuela, New Granada, and Ecuador. Ironically, these countries were established as centralist nations, and would be governed for decades this way by leaders who, during Bolivar's last years, had accused him of betraying the republican principles and of wanting to establish a permanent dictatorship. These separatists, among them José Antonio Páez and Francisco de Paula Santander, had justified their opposition to Bolivar for this reason and publicly denounced him as a monarch. Some of them had in the past been accused of plotting against Bolivar's life. José María Obando, who led the first dictatorship of New Granada, had been linked to the assassination of Antonio José de Sucre in 1830. Sucre was regarded by some as a political threat due to his popularity after he had led a resounding patriot victory at the Battle of Ayacucho, bringing with it the end of the war against the Spanish Empire in South America. Bolivar also considered him his direct successor and had attempted to make him vice president of Gran Colombia after Santander had been exiled in 1828. For the rest of the 19th century and indeed even early in the 20th century, the political environment of Latin America would be fraught with civil wars and characterized by a socio-political phenomenon known as caudillismo. This consisted on the arrival of an authoritarian but charismatic figure to the political scene who would typically rise to power in unconventional ways, often legitimizing his right to govern through undemocratic processes. These caudillos would maintain their control primarily on the basis of their personality, and a skewed interpretation of their popularity and what constituted a majority among the masses.